are influenced. But for the most part, there's about 650 million guns in the hands of private citizens in the world, with 7.3 billion people. So if you do the math, that's a little under 10%. 650 out of 7.3, just do 6.5, 7.3. It's a little under 10%, or 8.9 guns per 100 people in civilian hands on average. So 8.9 out of 100 people, that is 8.9 out of 100, that's 8.9%, have private ownership of guns, right? And if you look at the Unidox figures for self-reported homicide rates and compare them to civilian ownership rates, you really get a pretty interesting statistic. You get that roughly 80%, that is 80%, of countries with the lowest murder rates had a higher than average world ownership rate. Of these 15, or 60%, had higher than 15 per person, which means they had almost double the world average for ownership rates, and 7, or 28%, had a firearm ownership rate above 30, which is way above 8.9, right? So about 3 times more than the world average, about 28%. So roughly could be put that 80%, right, had more than the world average. That is the world average for gun ownership. So 80% of countries have way more guns than the rest of the world. 80% of the countries with the lowest murder rates. Whereas 60% had way more, that is 15.0, and 28%, or a quarter, had above 30, which is kind of ridiculous. And so in this list, we have Japan, Singapore, Iceland, Brunei, Bahrain, Australia, all that sort of stuff. And a lot of names on this list might shock you. You know, Iceland had 30.3 guns. Iceland has the lowest murder rate in the world, and their gun ownership rate is like number 5 in the world, something like that. Austria is 30.4. Switzerland is 45.7. That's almost half of their citizens own guns. Germany is 30.3. Norway is 31.3. Saudi Arabia is at 35. Sweden is 31.6. So a lot of these countries, Sweden, Switzerland, these sort of socialist utopias that the left loves to mention a lot, actually do own a lot of guns and do use them in self-defense a lot. In fact, requiring their citizens to go through military service, like in Norway, or even Switzerland for that example. And so a lot of these supposedly socialist utopias that restrict everyone's freedoms and that supposedly have super low crime actually have done really well by allowing gun ownership rates. So it's only been recently the crime has gone up in places like Sweden after mass immigration to there from the Syrian refugees and things. And I'm not saying that because I'm against Syrian refugees. It is simply an objective fact that the crime rate, the murder rate has gone up by about 50% in Sweden since then. But back in 2011, before that happened, we did see that they had a pretty low murder rate. So before they really started to do these sorts of things, they actually had a pretty low murder rate and very high gun ownership rate. So anyways, about 80% of countries in the world and 60% of most of these countries that were of the low murder rates, all the countries with the lowest murder rates, in Europe and Japan, all that sort of thing, of them, 80% actually had higher than the world average for gun ownership. So they had a lot more than average, and 60% had way more than average, right? So more guns does not mean less murders. It actually means, or more murders, it actually means less murders, right? So that's a kind of an interesting thing because it kind of blows that theory out of the water. So what about countries with high homicide rates? Surely countries with lots of murders have high crime. Switzerland can handle guns because they're rich, or Sweden is rich and socialist, therefore, of course they wouldn't have high crime even though they had lots of guns, right? Because it's everything else, right? Well, doesn't that defeat the whole argument of gun control if there's all these other things that cause crime? But anyways, that's what you'll hear some people say. So, it's kind of like, okay, fine, well, what about that? Honduras which is the highest murder rate in the world until recently with El Salvador, has 6.2 guns. 6.2 guns per 100 people, which is not a lot. That's a lot less than the world average. El Salvador has 5.8, which is less than the world average. And countries such as the Bahamas, Colombia, Trinidad and Tobago, Botswana, Myanmar, the Ivory Coast, places that we typically hear about having like really high murder rates, don't have very many guns. In fact, it's less than 8.9 guns. So think about it this way. Less than 8.9% of people own guns in these countries. I think Honduras is 6.2, right? Didn't I say that? But also, Central African Republic has 1% of the population that owns guns, or less, because this number is just how many guns there are. So a tiny percentage of the population there owns guns. The criminals. So when you have strict gun control, it ends up being that only the criminals have guns, and it doesn't really seem to be taking the guns out of the hands of the bad people. Only the hands of good, law-abiding citizens who are good, otherwise good, empathetic, caring, compassionate people that want to do the morally right thing and save the lives of innocent people. They don't have weapons to defend themselves. And so, for instance, in Mexico, they recently implemented some very, very, very strict gun laws, and it hasn't made the gun crime go away. In fact, it's gone up. In fact, in Mexico, only 20% or 1/5 of guns are actually legal guns. In Mexico, for instance, Mexico has an above-average rate, slightly above average. Actually has one of the highest gun ownership rates of countries on this list, and about 80% of those are illegal guns. That is, guns that were smuggled into their country. So making guns illegal did not take the guns out of Mexico. It just took them out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. Only 3 million, or about 2% of the population in Mexico, actually legally own guns. Bear that in mind. Maybe only 2% of guns are registered with the government. And yet something like 15% of the guns, right, are actually there in Mexico. So bear in mind, something like less than 20% of the guns that are of all the guns in Mexico are legal guns. 80%, or 4/5 of all the guns in Mexico are illegal guns. So banning guns just created a huge black market for them. It didn't actually solve the problem of crime. In fact, the murder rate's going up. The same thing happened in Honduras, and the same thing is happening in El Salvador right now, where really strict gun laws not only didn't work, but it actually made it worse. And this is something that a lot of people know about. This isn't some kind of secret right-wing kind of sort of conspiracy thing. This is what the United Nations, this is what these countries themselves are saying. And so gun control doesn't seem to be working. In fact, there's a huge push to remove the strict gun laws because they just aren't doing anything. It's wasting police resources and time. It's spending a lot of resources incarcerating otherwise innocent people who would only be guilty because, the government or whatever told them they were. Not really because they did anything immoral. They didn't hurt anybody. They just own a gun. And now it's illegal. And then if you look at, countries like South Africa or Guatemala, they also don't really seem to be benefiting from strict gun laws, right? So even in these countries where they have high gun ownership rates, such as Mexico, which is one of the few countries on this list that actually has a higher than the world average, these countries, for the most part, that have high gun ownerships have high illegal gun ownership rates. So civilian gun ownership doesn't seem to be increasing crime rates. Wouldn't you know it? Law-abiding citizens owning guns has almost no impact on the crime rates, right? And so, if you look, 32% of these countries, or a third of them, had higher than the world average. 8%, or 2 of them, had higher than 15, and 0 of them had higher than 30.0. So only 0% of these countries, which is none of them, had higher than 30.0. Bear in mind, 28% of countries, the top 25, Switzerland, Finland, Norway, all of Sweden, all these countries with really low murder rates that are these supposed socialist utopias, they all actually have really high gun ownership rates, whereas countries like Honduras, El Salvador, Venezuela, they have really low gun ownership rates. And when you look at their gun ownership rates, that are available, most of them are illegal guns. So almost every one of these guns are illegal. Despite there being very strict laws, it hasn't stopped them. Brazil, for instance. So a lot of these countries have very low gun ownership rates. Whereas countries with high gun ownership rates, such as Germany, Norway, all that sort of thing, they actually have low murder rates. So this is sort of a really big myth or conspiracy. I'm going to leave a link in the description to my blog, basically, that I wrote the article detailing this more, in case you want to see the picture of it, because I always like it being more compiled, and see the picture of it. But anyways, that's basically the case. So the second thing that people are going to say is, well, it's not how many guns that you own, it's the type of weapons, right? I would say it's the opposite, that it's really just, it has more to do with who has the weapons. If all the criminals have the weapons, like in Mexico, like I said, 80 to 90% of those guns are in the hands of criminals. They're illegal, unregistered guns. Then the crime is going to be really high. Whereas if you have all the guns in the hands of, say, the police and the civilian populace, you're not going to have high crime, like Switzerland, you know. And naturally, it's not about really having guns or not. It's about who owns those guns. And so curbs on the marketplace to ban the AR-15 from your average civilians from owning one probably will have no impact. So then you got the second type of people who say, well, it's not about, you know, how many guns. It's about the type of gun, right? And that's also kind of a bad argument to make. I would normally just end the video here. It's already 17 minutes. It's already, you know, a long video. But in the end, ultimately, that's... I have to address it because I will get this response. I've gotten it like 15 times. I know when I tell it to people, well, it's not about how many guns. It's about the time. And I can sympathize with that argument. I actually think you guys are thinking logically that, oh, I don't want to ban all guns. I just want to ban the super deadly mega assault weapons. Take those out of the hands of criminals. And I can at least sympathize with that position. However, that is also untrue. The fact of the matter is that if you look at it from an objective standpoint, the type of gun really makes no impact. So a good example of this would be that in Norway, the deadliest mass shooting of all time, in the world, right, in Norway, killed 67 people with a handgun, with a pistol, with a small 10-round pocket pistol, which is actually legal in most countries. This killed, the smallest, weakest gun you can really get, this killed 67 innocent people. Whereas, you know, you look at America, and the worst mass shooting with an AR-15 ever killed 20 people. And that was still really horrible, don't get me wrong. But it seems like handguns are actually the deadliest weapon. In fact, somewhere between 70 and 95% of all murders are done with handguns. And I say the reason for the discrepancy is that some police departments don't actually record whether or not it was done with a handgun, just the caliber, which are handgun calibers. And so somewhere between 70 and 95%, leaning towards 95%, because a certain amount is unknown, but we're pretty sure they're handguns. About 70 to 95% are from handguns of all the murders, and about 2% are from assault weapons. So assault weapons, despite being seen as these ultra-deadly, super massively, horrifically violent, will kill 1 billion people, weapons actually are responsible for something like 2% of all the murders. And this is a pretty widely accepted statistic. It's reported by the FBI. It's reported by the Bureau of Justice and Statistics, which is an actual thing, the BJS. It's reported by the New York Times, which is a very liberal, news-leaning organization. It's reported by almost everybody that, yeah, okay, assault weapons actually only kill 2% of the time. I think Joe Biden said it best, that assault weapons are only used to kill 2% of people. So what is the focus on assault weapons? Why do people want to ban assault weapons so bad if they make up less than 2% of murders? And what about mass shootings? Well, they do take up a higher, they take about maybe 9.7% of mass shootings, which is a little bit higher, obviously, but still under 10% of mass shootings actually use an assault weapon. And if you look at the deadliest mass shootings in the world, they actually used handguns. So they are, like Norway, for instance, or Virginia Tech shooting. And so this might come off as relatively surprising to some people, but in actuality, handguns are actually deadlier on average than assault weapons or military weapons. And that's because the military weapons were never designed to kill, right? The M16 was actually designed to injure, not to kill. By the international, the Hague and the Geneva Conventions, you can't actually have bullets designed to kill. They have to be designed to injure. Now, I know what you're thinking, well, can it kill you anyways? It's a bullet, for God's sake. Yeah, it will probably kill you. But my point I'm trying to make here is that military weapons are required by international law to stun, not to kill. Now, they probably will kill you if you don't get medical attention. But probably not as high as you think. Bullets only have a 5 to 15% chance to kill you. In case you didn't know that. People think, no, if you get shot with a gun, you have like a 90% chance of dying or something. You get shot in the gut, you're gonna die, Actually, you have about a 90 to 95% chance of survival. It's pretty darn high, at least over 85%. And that's if you get medical attention, of course. If you lay out and you bleed out on the floor, you're probably going to die. Whereas if you get medical attention, you call an ambulance or something, you're probably not going to die. So I want that to be known to people. A lot of people don't know that. They just think if you get shot with a gun, you instantly die. That, not guns are so much deadlier than knives and things. There was an attack in China that killed 50 people the other day, and there's even been attacks with knives and swords and things that have killed like 70 and 80 people. So you can actually kill more people. But even if we take knives off the table, there's also things like bombs. For instance, the deadliest attack in the world was 9/11, and that was a plane. The second deadliest attack was a Boko Haram attack, and that was with an explosive incendiary device that blew up and caught stuff on fire, just like 9/11 with the fire and everything. Basically, fire bombs are the deadliest weapons to kill people, because the bomb kills a bunch of innocent people, and then the fire spreads, catches everything on fire, burns down the buildings, and then a bunch of innocent people die. There was a recent arson attack in Australia that killed 173 people, and yet the deadliest mass shooting in the world killed 67. So I want to put that into perspective. A guy with a gallon of gasoline or with a car bomb or something, can actually kill more people than the deadliest mass shooting in the world. And that's not even the deadliest arson. The deadliest arson killed like 780 people, like 800 people or something. The deadliest mass poisoning killed 900 people, like Jim Jones. So if you were to poison a bunch of people, like go to a big party and put poison in the punch bowl, 900 people could die. And they wouldn't even know it. Whereas on the other hand, if there are maybe like a bunch of mass shooters, nowhere near as many people are going to die, because people can run away, people can fight back, people can tackle the guy to the ground. Guns can kill one person at a time, whereas a bomb can blow up everyone in 1 second, or poison, or acid attacks, the rise of acid, or incendiary weapons such as fire, locking everyone in that theater and burning it to death can cause super high death rates. One of the deadliest mass murders of all time was in Iran, and it was a theater bombing fire. So a sort of fire bombing attack is the deadliest attack in the world. 9/11 even, which is a plane attack. The average plane hijacking kills 200 to 300 people, and that's just crashing the plane. So the average plane hijacking, which there's been at least like 15 that I can think of, that have killed over 200 people, or 150 people. Some of the deadliest attacks in the world, there was an attack in India, from pressure cookers. You're thinking, what's a pressure cooker? A pressure cooker is literally just like a stove pot that's got pressure on it. Killed 200 people and injured another 700. So even if we got rid of every single gun in the entire United States, would be colonies with these people. If you want to know the objective truth, a lot more innocent people will probably die from bombings. For every single shooting that you stop, and the average mass shooting kills one person, or 7 if you go by the different definition, 4 or more dead. The average mass bombing, it kills like dozens, right? So you're not going to get rid of the problem of mass murder. Not even if they switch to knives, okay? Because in Australia and the UK, the murder rate didn't go down either when they switched over to knives. So even if you could get guns at the hands of civilians, which you can't do because of illegal smuggling and all these illegal guns, for instance, Mexico has more illegal guns than legal guns. In fact, 5 times as many. You're not going to get rid of the problem, are you? And yet, if you look at people who claim that, well, it's not about how many, it's not about how many guns, it's the type of guns. First of all, the deadliest guns of all time are actually pocket pistols. So if, the type of gun was so important, then if anything, we should be banning handguns on assault weapons, which would kind of blow up in the face of gun control advocates who've argued for fully automatic weapons and machine guns being illegal, and automatics and semi-automatics and these deadly military assault weapons. Those are actually the safest guns by statistics, and the deadliest guns are handguns, which are the only guns you want me to be able to own. And it's not that hard of a thing to realize that,